Hello, how you doing?
Nice to see you.
Good to see you all. I'll give everyone a chance.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello. It looks like we have a quorum, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm welcoming everyone to this regular meeting of the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee on March 15th, 2022. Maureen, please go ahead and take roll.
Chair Bowden,
Present.
Vice Chair Green, Member Dickerson, Member Johnson,
Heather.
Member Strom,
Present.
Member Watson, alternate member Redovit. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is consideration of minutes from our February meeting. Would someone move to approve? Thank you, Sonia. It looks like Colleen is a second. Are there any corrections or discussions? Colleen?
It's not real critical, but I noticed in the minutes, the written minutes, that it said that we were adding Arvada to the authority, but it's actually the purpose. So I don't know if that matters to anybody, but you were adding the purpose that was in the code for Arvada to the purposes.
Yeah, that was a mistake on my part. I did go ahead and add Arvada. So if it's okay with you, we'll just leave that error in there.
Doesn't matter to me. I just thought I'd point it out
Thank you for
in case it
catching
was
that.
important.
Yeah, no, yeah, I went ahead and did that. So that was just a typo or a misthought on my part. Any other further corrections or discussions regarding the minutes? Okay, is there a motion and a second to approve the minutes? Thank you, Sonia. A second, please. And Colleen, thank you for that second. So please vote by a show of hands to approve the minutes as recorded. That's unanimous. The minutes are accepted. All right, so next on the agenda is a public forum. Maureen, do we have any attendees?
We do not.
Okay, moving forward, then we'll go ahead and talk about code enforcement significant events. Code Manager Lewis, you have the floor.
Hi, good evening. It's nice to see you all. I want to start something a little differently rather than just giving you, if this is okay, if you'll entertain me, we're working on some leadership classes. And so I wanted to pose a question to you all, just to kind of break this up a little bit and get to know each other, if I have your permission to do that, Julie.
Fine with me?
Okay, so I would like to go through, and if you were any food in the world, what food would that be and why? I know it's a little odd, but I really want to work on some team building here with all of you. Okay.
Sonia.
Honey,
Monica.
Why?
because it never ages. You can use it forever and it's always sweet.
Oh, that's so good. I don't want to go after that. Mine is the opposite. I pick beans because they're high in fiber and they keep you going.
Preston, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was gonna say grass-fed, grass-finished steak because it's highest nutrient density.
My answer is a steak also because it's hearty and always available, kind of, yeah. Colleen?
Well, I'm kind of in line with Carson, only I would say buffalo.
How'd we do?
Well, there's two of us that still need to go. Does
Oh, I'm
Councilmember
sorry.
Russell want to weigh in on this one too?
I'm actually having trouble with with my computer. My mouse isn't working, and so I'm trying to figure out. I'm not exactly sure. How about a sweet potato? It's very high on the anti-inflammatory diet, so and it's good for you.
Well, Sonia stole my thunder. I was going to pick honey as well. And it was going to lead into something I was going to talk about next. It is something that has been found in tombs dating thousands of years old, and it's still edible. It has not changed for thousands of years, even though some of us have manipulated some of the bee populations. It's still the same formula and complex makeup. They have lots of restorative properties, including fighting allergies. We always go and try and get honey from wherever we travel just to try that and build up our immunity for that area that we're visiting. But most importantly, those that produce that honey is our pollinators. And so again, I just wanted to let you know that I'm still advocating on behalf of our pollinators here in Inglewood and throughout the state of Colorado. That's going to allow for more local authority control in order to better serve our pollinators. And I know a lot of you have been educated on this topic and take a clear passion on this, but two of the things that we're really working on is certain pesticides not being readily available because it's harming our bee population, whether or not that translates into the DNA of the plant or the flowers or the pollinators itself, and it's causing some hive collapse. We're also looking at giving local authority back into some grant money, doing some research in our local communities to help improve this. And without our pollinators, 70% of our food sources would be gone. All those beautiful fruits, any of the colorful vegetables, our trees that fruits, and our nuts, we really rely on not just bees, most people think of bees, but local pollinators, whether it's one of the several dozen local bees to certain other insects that do provide this vital resource. So that was kind of my lead in there, long explanation. We're continuing to do extra patrols within our parks, and I'm happy to report that we are finding that a majority of parks during these patrols are in compliance with all park rules. We continue to just evaluate this as we move forward and having conversations with people. We are seeing a trend in one particular park, and we're also receiving complaints, and so we've added extra random patrols into this particular park, which would be Rotolo. We are seeing an increase in off-leash violations as well as other violations. And so we're really focusing in using data that we're finding from our contacts and speaking with the public. I'm happy to report that we're also, our interactions with the code enforcement department have become very positive. And I think I've explained this trend over the last year. Part of it is due to the work that this body does and advocating on behalf of code enforcement and being that liaison with our citizens. I know that our communications team has partnered with you all in certain topics, and that's really made it beneficial for my team. We're coming into more pleasant conversations that are educational versus adversarial. And so I really wanted to thank you all for that. We have I completed our rounds of interviews for the park ranger, and we have extended an offer to a candidate who is currently in backgrounds. So we hope to have that done within the next 4 to 6 weeks. and that person can be brought on board. So I'm really looking forward to having this new park ranger and introducing them to this body. It is budgeted for 2 seasonal code enforcement officers this summer. We'll be posting those positions soon, and those will be specifically designated working on weeds and overgrowth within the city of Inglewood. And so they'll be identifying, providing education, and then any follow-up will be passed to code officials where we will take the next steps for the habitual or problem properties. We've run into some concerns recently, and it's not so much a concern, it's more of a lack of resources. And as we continue to move forward in talking about the unhoused populations, one of the barriers that we have identified is that those that are in unhoused situations, whether it's of their doing or their choice or current situations, many of them are unable to seek help or want to get help because they have their animal companions with them. A lot of our sheltering community, a lot of our shelters or those services don't allow for any type of cohabitation with their pets. And as many of you know who are pet lovers, and what we're seeing in current conflicts around the world and in natural disasters, that's the first thing that people think about is taking their pets. And so we've identified some resources so that we can, at a bare minimum within the state and within Inglewood, have those animals that are experiencing emergencies or need care or regular veterinarian services. We've identified some of those services, as well as the governor's office is putting forward some funding to have specific areas for sheltering so these people can get services and their pets companions would be permitted with them. As we all know, having a companion animal really lessens the stress on those that are experiencing traumatic events. And some of these folks who are unhoused are experiencing trauma in a variety of different ways. And studies have shown that even though they're unhoused, their pets are still taken care of very well. Most of their basic needs are met even before the owner's basic needs are met. But we really want to make sure that we continue with vaccinations and emergency care. And so we've identified that service. It's an ad hoc service, so we would need to apply through the shelter for those services to be reimbursed at a discounted rate to the veterinarian provider. And those are my updates. So again, this is at zero cost to the city. This is just identified as an opportunity should we need to provide services to someone who's unhoused and is willing to allow us to provide those services so that we can get them and their furry companions hopefully off the streets as soon as possible.
Sonia?
Is that through the Humane Society?
It is not. So we ran into a few emergency situations that prompted me to look for resources, and there are very, very few. I presented this to Maggie's Fund, who provided us with a resource. It is a national resource that's out in Nevada, where a caseworker is assigned, and prior to any services, the shelter staff with the owner need to do an intake before any kind of services are provided. And those funds go directly to the service provider, not that person that's applying for the fund.
That's interesting.
Further
So if
questions?
there was a homeless person needing help, do you just tell them to contact code enforcement to know to look?
They can contact code enforcement for the referral. They can also contact the Humane Society of South Platte Valley. Again, we are one of the first in the state of Colorado to identify this service, and it's getting through our All Health Network also. It really breaks my heart to see, just like all of you, animals that may be in crisis at no fault of their own due to unforeseen financial burdens. And so we, at a minimum, we want to try and get that pet seen in safe housing, receiving treatment until they can go back to a safer, more healthy, stable environment. Several of them, we've run into some situations where they felt that it was best to relinquish the dog, knowing that it would be better suited for the animal to be rehoused with a home that can provide those services. But in the case of one particular gentleman, he had been with this animal for 6 years, and he really did run into some significant hardships and really needed some resources. And I'm glad we got him in the system, not just for that, but for other assistance in trying to get him a new ID and trying to provide some kind of emergency housing temporarily while he receives some services. I'm happy to report the animal has made a full recovery. I'm really proud that we stepped in to help this animal as well as this gentleman, because now he's receiving the help that he actually needs. So that his biggest thing is that he didn't have an identification to get work, and nobody would hire him without that. And so we found a way to eliminate that barrier, and he's been on several job interviews, and I'm waiting to hear back for his success.
Well, that's nice. No, it's getting bad out there with people. I feel bad. It's like the grapes of wrath some days if I go by the parks and see different people by the river. So it's glad to hear that there's some more resources, because some people are just getting by day to day.
I think it's wonderful that you all stepped in to help him. I think your leadership, Dave, is one of the reasons why the Code Enforcement Division is looked at so favorably. I mean, the changes that I've seen over the past 6 years have been phenomenal. And the fact that you've turned code enforcement into a significant asset for the city is testimony to the hard work you have put in. Thank you. Any further questions for Code Manager Lewis? Okay, seeing none, then the chair recognizes our City Council Liaison, Rita Russell.
Oops. So I am experiencing multiple problems. I tried new batteries in the mouse. That's not working. So as long as I don't fat finger these things, I think I can control it from the screen. But I don't know that there's really that much to report. Last night at the city council meeting, actually, I think we had gotten an email a little earlier that one of the utility boxes for the payments was broken into, and the police are, kind of warning, to be careful, because I think things are getting worse, probably because of the economy. And one thing, it's probably a wise idea just to take your payment into City Hall now instead of using the pay boxes. Last night, we only had 2 things on the agenda: WIFIA loans. They're low interest loans that got approved for water and sewer infrastructure, and total $60 million, just over 60 million. And so we're going to be doing a lot of infrastructure. And I think one of the big things that the city's looking at over the next 5 to 10 years is starting to replace lead water pipes, which I believe is a huge problem, really, for a lot of cities. And I think a lot of that money has come from, I don't remember if this is the American Rescue Plan Act, but anyway, so that's pretty much all that's been going on. Like I said, that's mostly what happened last night. So, if you have any questions, I probably can answer them. I just can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
Colleen?
Yeah, I just have I don't know if you could answer this, but it seems if we're getting $60 million to do this, why should we have to pay any, these extraordinarily extreme high rates on our water bill.
So all I can say, and I did ask this question last night, we were able to secure the low interest loans because of the increased rates. You have to prove that you can make the payments. And so, I mean, I did ask, does that mean that we're not going to have to raise them? And they said, no, the loan amount was based, or the payments are all based on that. But the one thing about WIFIA loans, they only will give us as much as we need at the time. And we only have to start repaying principal on the amount that we've actually taken. And I think that we can defer the payments for 10 years on principal. So anyway, I think it's required.
Okay, can I follow up with, we got a huge grant, wasn't it $200 million or something for infrastructure? And we were like, what should we spend it on? And I think it should be spent on the water and sewer infrastructure. And that way we wouldn't have to pay these enormous amounts, because I'm paying now monthly what I used to pay quarterly.
And you know, Colleen, I can identify with you. I've gotten a lot of phone calls, and I did ask last night if we could defer some of those. And I am incredibly concerned about people that are living on fixed incomes, which of course, you know, Colleen, that it's difficult. Peter Van Rye assured me that if people are struggling, they can contact the utilities department, and there are some resources. I do know that Arapahoe County is making available monies to help people. Originally, council talked about doing a program to help seniors, but the county's already doing that. So I think there will be money available, but I did ask last night, is there any way that we can back off of some of this? We have, and this is what Director Van Rye said, and I concur with this, that we have deferred our infrastructure for so long, it's getting to the point that it's very difficult to do that. So I hear you all, and it is difficult. And I do believe that maybe it was that big grant money program where a lot of the lead pipe replacement money is coming from. So.
Thank you, Councilwoman Russell. Further questions for Rita? Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and recognize the Communications Subcommittee lead, Monica, in regards to any reports or updates.
Hi, everyone. I would just have two things. Carson had the question, where does the $2 per capita for our Tree City designation come from? And Dave Lee says that funding comes from the Parks budget and the Open Space Fund. He also said we've met all of the requirements, and if you have any further inquiries, you can look at the national at Tree City at the Arbor Day Foundation to see those. But we have met those, and it's really, you know, it's done. So that's great news. The other thing is the magazine going forward. Let's see, where is that? Sorry, I'm looking in my email. Just please hold. There it is. Okay, we have two requests in for the summer magazine. The topics are weed mitigation and emerald ash borer. We'll probably recycle and maybe zhuzh up an old article encouraging people to mitigate their weeds before they get out of control. And the second topic is a reminder to treat your ash tree for emerald ash borer, and to notify residents of the new city forester, and as well as financial resources that will be made available to help people decide whether they have a healthy tree that should be treated, or if they can get some financial assistance treating or removing a tree that is at risk. So all that is in the works, and I've asked to set up a meeting with the communications team just to go over what posts will look like over the summer, just kind of touch base with them. That's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Monica. Questions for Monica, please? Colleen?
Yeah. Monica, where did the figure 22,500 ash trees come from? Was it just an estimate?
That's a great question. That'd be a question for Dave Lee. So
do you want to field that, or should I just send him a little quick note? Because when I was doing all of this work for the tree matrix, some of the cities that I worked on, in fact, 4 out of the 5, I think, indicated how many ash trees they had and how many were in the entire city. And so I correlated some of that with the size of this, of the city boundaries. And
what calculation did you come up with?
Well,
because then
the closest to us was is it Lafayette? I think it was. It had 9 square miles, and they came up with an estimate. Apparently, some Colorado Department of Forest or whatever that is did an overview, and they estimated that there were 21,900 ash trees in Lafayette.
And how many does Englewood say we have?
22,500 on 6 square miles.
Okay.
But almost all the cities said the ash trees of any type of ash, and there are a lot of different types of ash, were 15% maximum, 10 to 15% maximum of the total number of trees. But we don't know what our total number of trees are. So, and just looking at my neighborhood, there may be 1 or 2 ash trees per 10 houses. So I don't know where that figure came from, but I think it would be a good thing to know, because we have to know what we're going to be dealing with.
Sure. I live in the same neighborhood, and I definitely have been talking with neighbors. There's a lot of ash trees in people's backyards. There's one sprouting up right in front of my house right now. They're
volunteer.
Volunteer. Yeah.
I've had to chop down a bunch myself.
Yeah. So, and you have to remember, we're a different location than Lafayette. They are a little more open space, like Englewood is the wooded nook, right? We have a pretty dense tree canopy. So I'm sure that there has been a lot of analysis that went into that estimation. And I will be happy to follow up with Dave Lee on that. And I've never stumped the guy. He always is able to answer questions pretty much right away. So how did we get that total? Great. I'm on it, Colleen. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Further questions for Monica? All right. Seeing none, then let's move forward to new business. And first on the agenda is election of a new chair and vice chair. And I thought I would just go through the process real quick so that everybody understands. So both positions, both the chair and the vice chair, serve 1 year in that role. And then next March, we have another voting session. So it's a year commitment. First, what we'll do is I'll open up the floor for nominations. You can only nominate one person until all the rest of people had finished nominating. And then we'll need to confirm the willingness of the member to serve as either chair or vice chair. And then we'll close the nomination and do a vote by voice vote. I do believe it's required that nominees be present in order to conduct the vote. And then we'll do the chairman position first and the vice chair after that. So I would like to open nominations for the chair of the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee. Monica?
I nominate Carson Green as chair.
Okay, thank you. Are there further nominations for chair? Colleen?
No, I wanted to second that nomination.
Are there further nominations for the chair, please? All right, seeing none, then I would like to confirm with Carson that you're willing to serve in that role.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay, so by a vote of hands, or actually by, pardon me? Oh, Maureen.
Sorry, that a nomination is not a motion. So you need to move and second for chairperson.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Do I vote?
Yes.
Yes, you do.
Yes, yes, you can.
So I'm going to close the floor to nominations and go ahead and conduct a vote. Those in favor of Member Green as chair, please raise your hand for an aye. Those opposed, please raise your hand as a no. Looks like we have 5 votes in favor. So congratulations, Member Green. You are now the chair of the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee, effective immediately, actually.
Oh, really? Immediately?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I turn the meeting over to you. Yeah, I'll help you though. All right, so now I'd like to open nominations to the floor for.
Point of order.
Yes,
If
thank you.
he's the chair, he opens the nominations for co-chair.
That's
I did
correct.
not realize that. Mr. Green or Chair Green, please proceed.
All right. So let's start with nominations for vice chair. And I guess so it shouldn't be stated as a motion yet till we find out if we have others. Okay. So are there any nominations for vice chair?
I would like I would
Go
like
ahead.
to
I'm
nominate.
not sure how to address you. You're not Chair Bowden anymore, huh?
No, it's just I would like to nominate Robert. However, he is not here to confirm his willingness to serve in that role. What happens in that case, Maureen? Do we have to postpone?
You do not. You can nominate someone that's not at your meeting.
Can we vote?
Absolutely.
All right, all right. Thank you.
I'll second. Oh, I don't second yet. Sorry.
Right.
I
Okay.
move.
You're supporting that.
I'm supporting that
nomination.
nomination.
Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Okay, then would someone like to make that a motion?
I move.
I second.
Okay, so there's a motion to make member
Watson.
thank you, Member Watson, the vice chair. And then let's go ahead and vote. Show of hands in favor. And then that's everyone. So unanimous. Member Watson will be Vice Chair Watson now if he accepts. So I guess I'll contact him and make sure he accepts that, and then let you know, Maureen, if we have to do this again next time or not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. I wasn't really prepared to be the chair today. So that's finishes out our election of chair and vice chair. Then we have more new business, review weeds code changes from city council. And this is the email in the agenda from City Council Member Russell about City Council Member Woodward's comment for making the change, removing the word growing. And former Chair Bowden, is your impression of what we're doing here just getting a consensus if we think we should make that recommendation and just, okay. So
I believe that council just wanted us to look at that and see if there were any issues. Rita, do we need to respond?
I think that last time it was all available, right? But we couldn't vote on it because it was new business. It hadn't been on the agenda. Isn't that what happened the last time? So I think you just give the recommendation. If you think the word growing needs to be changed, or probably you can change it any way you would like.
Code Manager Lewis, did you have any thoughts on this?
So this stemmed out of some properties that became uncompliant. And because we went into that snow season, and Colleen can know firsthand because she's chimed in on this ordinance before. Once the growing season ends, we are prohibited from doing enforcement, even though the cast off and the shells of what may have been weeds that we have previously documented, we no longer can enforce. And so we found a way around that with one particular case that member Woodward brought forward. But code enforcement would be in support of removing the word growing because our life cycles in Inglewood and the state of Colorado are so unpredictable that it would allow us to better enforce and mitigate those hazardous cases.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone else have any thoughts on this? Oh, go ahead.
I
Member
didn't
Bowden.
see a reason why we shouldn't remove it, and I'm surprised we didn't catch it before. So I approve that change.
Yeah, it seems like I can't think of anything wrong with it. What was the thing you did, Code Manager Lewis, to get around it with the property you're dealing with?
We had to articulate that it was considered a nuisance prohibited. That way it would allow us to abate the property. There were other concerns on the property, not just the former growing weeds that had gone out of compliance. And so we utilized nuisance prohibited and the property eventually came into compliance. But we couldn't apply that specific weed ordinance.
I'm curious how you identify on a property what things that are over 6 inches are considered weeds versus, somebody having plants that may or may not be considered weeds by one person or another.
That is a great question. So the person would need to prove that they were intentionally planted or part of their landscaping. And we use common sense here. If someone has dandelions the first short period of the season and they say, hey, can you give us a couple more weeks while the bees pollinate? It's their first food, then we'll go back a couple weeks later. It's more of those properties, and you can identify them that may have something that would be considered noxious under state ordinance that we could tie into that. Again, I like to use we had the milkweed person come forward. The resident wasn't educated on that, but if she would have said this is intentional, it's for the monarchs, we wouldn't ask them to cut that down. Or the person who received constant complaints because they had a whole patch of thistles in their backyard, but the complainant educated us on this is a specific type of thistle. It's not the Colorado one. I imported this. I use this in cottage industry. I use this to make crafts specifically around Scottish and Irish heritage. That's not something we're going to enforce because it was an intentionally planted item. Artichokes is a thistle, and someone called on an artichoke plant that had gone to seed in someone's yard, and they articulated that they're now past the eating stage and they wanted to use them for to dry them and do flour arrangements with them. So it's kind of communication between ourselves and the citizen. If the citizen feels they're not reached, then we will go out and have a further conversation.
Thanks for the clarification. Go ahead, Member Dickerson.
I have had a problem with this. I've had several people call me about this. A lot of native grasses, turf grasses, grow a little bit taller than 6 inches. And you're not supposed to mow them. It's bad for them. And there was the guy I got my dog from, who willed me the dog, had very long grass, but once it got to about 4 inches, it fell over. And he liked it growing like that. It was better for his lawn, but it did exceed 6 inches. Some of the cities I know make the limitation to 12 inches, but then they include even flowers, which I don't think is appropriate. But if it's a native grass, like buffalo grass, and it grows a little bit taller than 6 inches, is that something you're going to enforce?
Again, if somebody comes forward with us, and again, this has been part of the whole opportunity with code enforcement becoming more educational than enforcement, when we interact with our citizens, is really, if they're able to articulate. We have a gentleman that calls us every fall, who is a biologist who works at DU, who has planted native grasses, and he calls us preemptively every year. Just want to let you know, I have these grasses growing in my yard. You can come and take a look at them. I have the invoice for when I planted them, and most of them only repropagate from their seed, so they have to go to seed. And so then that would not be something that we would move forward with, and we would not even be able to obtain a conviction. If you were to come to my yard, I have a grass plant that grows 6 feet tall. And it was intentionally planted to offer some more privacy around my front windows. So we look at the totality of circumstances, and what may not look like a native species to us, if we issue a notice, someone calls us and says, hey, code enforcement, this is the circumstance. We'll document that case and have a conversation about that.
Thank you. It's nice to know that it works that way. Any other thoughts or anything on this change? Councilmember Russell, should we like officially respond to City Council about this, or?
I think that you just have to vote on it, and I see Ms. Willis is got her hand raised. I think probably
Okay.
she will address that, whether it just goes straight to the attorney or not. But I think you have to do a vote. But talk with
Okay.
Maureen.
Thank you. Ms. Willis?
Councilmember Russell is correct. You do need to make a motion and vote.
Okay.
And you should make that recommendation back to City Council. City Council will direct the attorney.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I so move
Do we need
to
that
remove
stated out?
growing from the code.
Okay. And communicate that back to council. And was that a second, Member Bowden?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, show of hands in favor of making this change, recommending to City Council what City Council Member Woodward suggested. Okay, Member Dickerson, was that a yes as well?
Yes.
Okay, then that's unanimous. Everyone voted yes for that. So we'll go ahead and make that recommendation to City Council. Ms. Willis, do I need to write an email or something, or?
If you'd like, I can write the email.
Okay, please do.
All right, thank you.
But doesn't it normally go through our council liaison? That was what was determined. We send an email to our council liaison,
That's correct.
and
Okay.
then she takes it to council.
Absolutely.
That'll be great.
Okay, and did you have something else, Councilmember Russell?
No, that's just what I was going to do. I probably, even if I didn't get the email, would just share with council next meeting. But thank you for taking care of that, Maureen.
Okay,
You're welcome.
thank you. Code Manager Lewis?
I just wanted to thank you all. This was a trouble spot that doesn't come up very often, and it was identified, and I appreciate your quick response and having this set forward.
No problem. Thank you.
Look at that, Carson. 15 minutes into the role, you've already adjusted code. Congratulations.
That's funny. Yeah, that doesn't happen much. Not like that. So now moving into unfinished business. So on EAB follow-up, can you remind me what we should be doing on this at this point now?
Happy to. So
Member Bowden?
I would start with the proposed changes to code that the city attorney sent to us based on our presentation back in September. Because they have revised that code based on that. Maureen? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Willis.
Sorry.
It's hard to get used to, I understand. The city attorney apologizes for not being able to attend this meeting. And she asked me to be able to answer any questions that y'all might have. She said the main thing that was changed is that all of the code, all of the items that should be in the code where it's punishment, she moved into that area. So you're going to notice that in this council bill. But if you have any questions, please let me know.
Okay. Member Dickerson?
Yeah, I have a question. Nothing was done about the prohibited trees, and that was one of our main interests presenting back in 2018, because it still has that, except for mature trees more than 1 inch in diameter. There is no such thing as a mature tree 1 inch in diameter. So that means we can't get rid of any of these trees. And identifying just a few trees when there are a lot more, even Code Manager Lewis pointed out there were a lot of noxious trees, like the tree of heaven, that cause problems with sewer. Almost all, when we did the tree matrix, and I think Carson can add to this, there were no definitions except for Denver of what a mature tree was. And nobody had any real prohibited trees, and they didn't base it upon whether the tree was mature or not. There were no exceptions. The cleanest way was, because for one thing, nobody plants cottonwood trees. Nobody plants Siberian elms. They plant themselves. And box elders are planted, they're volunteers, and they're weeds, and they're invasive, and they're noxious. So if we just change that, because there is something early on about the tree advisory board and the director of parks coming up with a list of noxious trees, then instead of saying prohibited plantings, just say noxious trees as defined by the Colorado Department of Agriculture or the Forest Department or whatever it is. I think there's a couple of the cities, and it's listed on the tree matrix, that just say those are not allowed to grow, and they're banned from the city, and there's no exception. So
What we saw mostly, remember Dickerson, didn't we mostly see that, at least the ones that I did, didn't even have anything specifically in code about prohibited.
That's right.
What they do have is they have recommended as a separate thing outside of code, what recommended street trees, Ms. Willis?
Yes, those are the things that have been moved over to the nuisance abatement area. So maybe what we should do is, right now, Title VII is being completely rewritten, the entire Title VII. So my recommendation would be to maybe hold off, and I'll get a draft of Title VII to you guys for your next meeting, and then maybe you can go through those nuisance abatements and make sure that the items that you want in there are in there.
Title VII is not, that's,
Nuisance abatement?
no, that's not. You're talking about Title 15 is the nuisance abatement.
Okay, Title 15 then. I can send that to you guys with the changes in it.
We
If that's-
got it.
And do they have the changes of the trees that you're worried about?
Nope.
Okay, so that's what you guys are wanting to give to the city attorney, is this kind of information. But I think that she's going to move those all over.
Well, in any case, we have to eliminate the exception for mature trees. That's got to go. And instead of saying planting, it should say they're banned from the city.
Now, are you thinking that the code itself should specifically ban specific types of
No.
trees, unlike
No,
what we
not
saw?
specific ones.
Okay, so you're saying make
Noxious
it
trees. Make it
and
more
then-
general. Noxious trees as defined.
as
by-
defined by what? Doesn't that make it kind of arbitrary depending on
No,
who's?
there's a whole list of
Hold on one sec, Member Bowden.
there's a whole list of problem that noxious trees that is established by some department in Colorado and in the nation for that matter. Department of Agriculture has a list of noxious trees. And that by that they mean invasive, non-native, dangerous, self-propagating, disease vectors like Siberian elms. Every single Siberian elm you see is non-native. It's crowding out all other trees. It's ecologically damaging Colorado.
Okay, but you're saying that there's a standard list, and I'm
There's a
interested.
standard list
Can
for
you,
Colorado.
Can you find what that is and share that with me for next time? And Member Bowden, what did you want to say?
I think I can help clarify this a little bit.
Sure.
I spent some time on it. They've created a tree advisory board, and yearly the tree advisory board is to submit a list to the director on recommended trees to plant, and also a list of prohibited nuisance species, which I think covers what we're talking about. So it gives the city an opportunity to change that list as we move forward. And I think it was left, an old statement was left in there on page 23, 11-5-8 says, prohibited planting. I think that maybe was left in an error. I would either remove that or add the ash tree to it. And then we had also identified that we needed to change the 1 inch in diameter. That was in our presentation to the city.
Yeah, it was.
Thank
Ms. Willis?
In response to the tree advisory board, that has not been established as yet. And I was told that either the code enforcement board can be the tree advisory board, or Parks and Rec would be the tree advisory board. Would you guys want to be the tree advisory board, or would you prefer it be Park and Rec?
Interesting.
Carson, I can answer that.
Okay, well, let me hear from Councilmember Russell. You had your hand up.
And I don't remember what meeting I was at, but I brought up this board. I asked why it had to be Parks and Rec, or Ms. Willis is absolutely correct. Those two, Parks and Rec and the other one that she mentioned. And I said, well, why couldn't it be code enforcement? So perhaps Member Dickerson has the reason for whatever.
Go ahead, Member Dickerson.
Okay, on page 20, it's written in that the City of Inglewood's Parks and Recreation Commission also shall act as a tree advisory board. And it gives what it is, you know, what their duties are. I think that needs to be added to their enabling legislation. It can't just be right here. But at any rate, that's what they've decided. And I don't have really anything to say, I think that what they're supposed to have, that's fine. But the problem is everything on here about their doing the recommend to the director a list of preferred trees and a list of prohibited nuisance species within the city. But under this, I think that whole B on page 23, prohibited plantings, needs to go away because it's in contradistinction to that. I mean, it's doesn't belong anymore. If actually it's going to be either that or change it to noxious plants are prohibited, noxious trees are prohibited in the city of Inglewood, defined by the Department of whatever, and I'll get you the exact thing. There's a forestry department, there's a Department of Agriculture, and they all have these invasive trees. And mainly it's aimed at things like the tree of heaven and Siberian elms and emerald ash and that kind of thing.
Okay, Ms. Willis.
This is a draft council bill. Okay, so nothing has been decided. That's why it's before you all, so that you can review it and make suggestions to it, including who would be the tree advisory board. So it can either be you guys, code enforcement, that has been what was told to me by the city attorney, Parks and Rec, or code enforcement, whichever you guys prefer. You can make that recommendation along with any other recommendations you want to make on this draft council bill.
Thank you. Member Bowden.
I wanted to respond to Maureen's comment that the advisory board had not been created or decided upon, but my point was, if there is an advisory board as stated here, then we don't need 11-5-8B on prohibited planting, because that board would preempt that statement.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Thank you.
City Councilmember Russell.
So my question just was, and I think it was when a meeting with the city attorney, why couldn't code enforcement be the board, because you already were dealing with those things? So I'm supposing if you're dealing with those things, you could make the suggestion that it would be you, and then you would need to leave it in the code, correct?
No.
Well, you mean if we were the tree advisory board, that we would still need the specific banning section? Is that what you mean?
So what is the tree advisory board for? Isn't it for deciding what trees are noxious?
Yeah, and that's what Member Bowden was pointing out, is whoever ends up becoming the tree advisory board, it's listed in here in the suggested responsibilities that they can, let's see, so they make a list of preferred tree species and prohibited nuisance species. So that's already listed in there. And that's why I remember Bowden was pointing out that if that exists, then we really don't need the section that specifically excludes particular trees and the mature tree definition that doesn't really make sense. Code Manager Lewis.
If you don't mind me weighing in on this.
Please do.
My recommendation to be consistent with code would not be to put this board here with code enforcement, that it would stay with Park and Rec, only because the ordinances specifically refer to the authority of the forestry, which falls into the Parks and Recreation Division, not code enforcement. By doing it through this organization or this group, they can weigh in on ordinance changes related to it, and I encourage that moving forward. But the potential burden that you may put on code enforcement officers who are not subject matter experts, requiring that the forestry, the Parks and Rec, handle this, also send forward the investigation, and then if there's a subsequent violation, the referral would come to code enforcement for issuing the summons or the abatement. Just because we really, I'll be honest, we don't have the capacity to take on that knowledge and education and enforcement component or those recommendations. And many of the people that are on, and Monica's on the Parks and Rec Commission as well, many of the appointees are working within our park system or live in Inglewood and employed by other park systems within the metro area. And so they are very, very well educated and subject matter experts on a variety of horticulture issues.
That totally makes sense. Thanks, Code Manager Lewis. Member Johnson.
That's why I had my hand up, and well said, Code Manager Lewis. Yeah, they've got it. So, and Dave Lee is heavily involved in that committee, and he works with the forester, and they're working on that side, and that would be pulling them into yet another committee. And it's really, I mean, Dave Lewis has his hands full with all that they do. It's a totally different thing. But I can see these two committees overlap quite a bit. And like the Parks and Rec department is doing all the development in the parks, but Manager Lewis is enforcing the code in those spaces. So, I think the best thing to do is just, communicate and rely on their expertise where we need to.
Makes sense to me. Member Dickerson.
As I said, I don't mind the Parks and Recs committee, but I was thinking that maybe instead of the director of parks, that we should specify the open space manager, because they are arborists. And I see a lot of loopholes in this as far as enforcement is concerned. For one thing, that list is the list that are on the responsibilities. I'm not as concerned with the who is acting as the tree advisory board, as it's made very it's in the enabling legislation as well as here. But the list of their stuff is they recommend a preferred tree species and a list of prohibited nuisance species within the city, but the first one was public property and a list of prohibited nuisance species within the city. And once that's established, how is that enforced? So there's some loopholes here. There's a lot of kind of weirdnesses that I see, but I don't have a problem. Whoever they designate as the tree board, it just needs to be in their enabling legislation. Or there has to be a new tree board. There's only one city that has a tree board, and it's a tree advisory board, and it's made up of members of another committee and the city arborist and a city representative. A lot of this, a couple of the cities don't even allow code enforcement to enforce anything on trees and shrubs. But
Thank you, Member Dickerson. Ms. Willis, do Do you know if there's anything in the section we don't see yet, which I guess is 15, that addresses enforcement of these things?
No, and this is a draft, and what the city attorney was hoping is that you guys would go through the draft and make recommendations or changes.
Yeah,
So I don't know how you guys want to do this. But that's what she was hoping for.
okay. So I think we are gonna at least need this into our next meeting for that. And I think it would help if we could see whatever the draft changes are to the enforcement part, to take that into account when we go through this in more detail. These are all really good points. And it sounds like, maybe removing that specifically prohibited section and making sure we cover, the loopholes that Member Dickerson just pointed out. It is kind of weird that it recommends only for public and prohibited throughout. Seems like that should be for both. And Code Manager Lewis, what do you think of that point about, so if this tree advisory board is, I don't know, as often as maybe annually changing the list of prohibited nuisance species, does that then put it on code enforcement to enforce that when a neighbor says, hey, they have something on this list that was just updated, what does that, how does that play out?
So this could potentially go into nuisance instead of the way that it's written, only from the standpoint of maybe the forestry department or the forestry person should be the ultimate responsible person to investigate. It's just like if we were to have a water issue, the water department's gonna investigate and forward us their information for issuing a violation. And so I really would like some consistency with the subject matter experts. We are not, and for me, just alone to have to go to take a class for a year to become horticultural specialist is really doing a disservice to the city.
So that really sounds to me like you think that whatever the enforcement part of this becomes in section 15, that it should specifically say enforcement of whatever the current nuisance tree list is should go to the city forester or whoever that authority is. And then code enforcement would be responsible for implementing the actual enforcement of whatever that person deems is necessary.
Yes.
Okay.
And that would be consistent with the way we work with other departments currently, whether that be some of the licensing stuff, whether it deals with some other safety concerns, water department, illicit discharges, all of those are investigated in the authority, but the actual summons is done either by a peace officer or a sworn municipal officer, which would be us.
Okay. Member Bowden?
No, I was kind of responding to Maureen's question about how you guys want to go through this. I did pull up the presentation on where we asked the city council to consider code changes, and that's what was sent to the city attorney. Would it be helpful for us to go through those recommendations and see if this proposed code change addressed those issues?
That does make sense. And there's also, like, I know, like, just going through this and I'm sure Member Dickerson too, after we just went through all the code of all those cities, there's things that stick out to me that could be potentially structured differently. And I haven't written all those differences down yet, but I do think that what you're suggesting makes sense. Do you want to, you think we should do that right now?
I'm just proposing it might help kind of focus us on what we were trying to accomplish and what we specifically asked for, and if those needs have been met.
Sure. That makes sense to me. Member Dickerson?
Yeah, I think that where they haven't met is the fact that it's been changed around so much now that there are more loopholes than there were before. We did suggest at the meeting, you guys suggested, I sat there and watched, but suggested that a change had to be made on this and a few other things. I I wanted to add something to the purpose because it doesn't talk about diversity. It doesn't talk about protecting trees, but the enforcement thing is an issue. And there is a section where it talks about responsibility for enforcement. And I think that needs to be added to, you know, that how they're going to go about determining if this is a nuisance or not. And I'm not even sure we need to even designate it as a nuisance. If a tree is endangering property or persons, then the director or the open space manager or whoever, along with a certified arborist, needs to determine that. And then they should follow the enforcement process outlined in Title 18. I don't think we need to shuffle it off to, listen, I've made notes all over this, and this is just scatter shooting. So I would volunteer with you or anybody else that wanted to write up some changes, take this draft, get it into a format, and redline it and add things to it on our recommendations and where we're having a problem, and we can discuss it at the next meeting. But I think we need to look really closely at this, because it's, by putting it in the way they've got it, I think it leaves huge loopholes, and it puts an unnecessary burden on code enforcement when nothing has been decided as to whether or not this is really a nuisance or not.
Okay, let's go ahead and do it. Member Bowden suggested. I've got the PowerPoint that you sent me, so I should be able to share this, because it does make sense to just walk through that, and everything else that's been said also makes sense. So let's see, share screen. All right, are you all able to see it, or should I maximize it? Does it work like this?
We can see it.
Okay, cool. So this is the presentation that we put together and went over with City Council that prompted the city attorney's recommended changes, is my understanding of this whole process so far, right? Okay. Member Dickerson, your hand is still up. Is that from before?
Oh, sorry. I thought I'd taken that down.
No problem. All right. So we, these are the primary topics.
Yeah, if you go to slide 8, that's where we really start the specific
Okay.
recommendations.
All right. So in 11.5.8, that's where we talked about adding ash to the prohibited list and fixing the definition of mature. But right now we're talking about potentially just removing that, since the direction that is in the draft, which to me makes sense also based on having looked at all these other cities, putting actual names of tree species in the code seems unnecessary. I mean, unless we were going to recommend we do that with just ash, because we know that, but even then, like, I guess it's possible that would almost be confusing if someone chooses to treat and keep an ash. So we don't want to make them completely prohibited. So it does seem like with the direction that this is going, where there's going to be a tree advisory board under Parks and Rec, under Dave Lee or whoever's acting in that capacity, will make the list of recommended and prohibited. And then this doesn't address, okay, yeah, this was in the UDC part about, did we get anything back from the city attorney on that section?
No,
We did not.
No.
Okay. So that probably still needs to be addressed then. It's been a while since I looked at that. Does that already have specific trees specified in the UDC part? It does. Okay. So that should be, unless that's going to be modified as well. I mean, that would be another thing to potentially treat the same way. We could recommend that, you know, to the city attorney to look at that part and make that reference the same thing as the, you know, what this tree advisory board is responsible for specifying, recommended and prohibited. We could have the development standards reference that same set of lists and then take that out of code. So code's not specifying specific species, which seems like it's more flexible for the city anyway. Does anyone have any thoughts on that, or?
I think that's just fine with me. I
Okay.
was going to recommend that anyway.
Okay. And since I've got my screen showing this, I'm not seeing everyone. So if I miss someone letting me know, maybe I can get. All right. I think I can see everyone and this now. All right. So then we have, yeah, maybe not. Sorry, rearranging my screens to be able to see. We recommended that the city ordered tree preservation and removal applies to prohibited trees as well as dead dying trees. Now, are these actually, member Bowden, can you address this?
Right, so that first one on city ordered tree preservation and removal, that entire section was taken out. And it would originally, you know, I think it said just public property, and we were saying we needed to do it also on private property.
Oh, right, okay.
But overall, I would say this is the biggest gap I'm seeing, because it's really unclear what the private, how the private addresses trees. You know, there was the addition of a statement in section or in Title 15 on, you know, what happens if you don't comply, but instead of, you know, they replaced that whole preservation and removal procedures with a statement on standards for planting, maintenance, and construction activities. And instead of citing what we expect, they refer to ANSI standards for tree care, International Society of Arborists tree care, and they have a couple of different places that you're supposed to go. And I think it's, I don't know, I came away going, so what am I as a private, you know, what am I required to do for private trees? I understand what, I mean, I think she did a really good job of clarifying who was responsibility for the right of way, but we lost what the responsibility is for private trees. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And this also has in the new version, the proposed version of 11.5.6, it has the director shall maintain official list of desirable tree species specifically for public. And I'm not sure what the overlap between that and the tree advisory board list of preferred tree species is. I mean, it would make sense. Oh, I see. So the tree advisory board in this proposal recommends to the director the preferred list and nuisance list, and then the director defines what that is. So that makes sense, but it does need to be more specifically broken out to cover private as well, is what you're pointing out. Okay.
I mean, maybe we can ask, she can come to our next meeting to help explain to us how it's going to work, but I reviewed it twice and I still was unclear as to what my responsibilities are outside of, and in my private yard.
Ms. Willis?
Sorry.
Oh, you didn't have your hand raised?
I did, but it was by accident. Never
Oh,
mind.
okay. Do you know if the city attorney would be able to come to our next meeting potentially?
Yes, she felt really bad about not being able to make tonight. So yes, I'm sure she would be able to attend the next meeting.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, so whatever we set our next meeting for, let's try and confirm that she'll be able to come, because I think we can have some good suggestions, and I know we'll have a lot of good questions. Okay, so continuing on with this, clarify property owner versus city responsibilities. Okay, so all of these kind of fall under that same things that we've already talked about. Those same things we've already talked about. Public versus private, and then where the enforcement's going to be defined. So go ahead, Member Bowden.
I was just going to say that I think they did a really good job in clarifying who is responsible for the right of way. That part to me seemed pretty solid.
Yeah, it's very similar to what we saw in the other cities too.
Yeah.
Other than like some of the cities do have like the kinds of things that Code Manager Lewis told us he didn't think were appropriate, or that we should put on them to deal with, like, because some of the cities specifically say that code enforcement can go onto private property without necessarily permission. And that was kind of surprising to see after all of our discussions and how careful Code Manager Lewis likes to recognize private rights and et cetera. Go ahead, Member Dickerson.
Yeah, Boulder is usually the one that did that. They said that the city manager who was given the responsibility could go on private property to inspect for disease and dead or dying trees, but he couldn't take any action without a warrant. And he had to have an arborist with him to identify whether or not the trees were healthy. But be that as it may, otherwise they didn't enforce anything and on private property, and it had to be done by a warrant, and it wasn't code enforcement that did it, but he had to have a warrant to demand any change.
Code Manager Lewis, whenever it says an order in code, does that typically mean a warrant? Or
No, an order or notice of violation. I just have to remind everyone that our codes in Inglewood are very unique, unlike some of my colleagues, where code enforcement falls to civil arbitration versus criminal. These are all criminal municipal violations. So I would physically have to apply for a warrant to physically go onto someone's property to do an inspection, and to get a warrant is very difficult. All of our inspections are done from the public right of way, and I explained the process and why we do that. Other cities do it differently only because they have a whole civil section that deals with code and building completely separate, that we don't have the infrastructure to facilitate.
I see. Yeah, because I noticed that like Denver and Westminster, if the parks, like Westminster specifically, the director of Parks and Rec can order someone to take care of something, and if they don't, then they can go on and do it themselves, even on private property, and then charge the owner for it.
The only situation where that would occur is if we are able to, and again, they're civil, and they can go to a civil administrator and ask for that jurisdiction. But for us, we utilize our nuisance abatement process, which is clearly defined. We abate properties. we would need to do the inspection from the right of way. We would afford the owner the opportunity to have a licensed arborist come in to review and make recommendations and present those to the city. And if they fail to do that, then we can take action under nuisance abatement. If it is a hazardous tree or poses an imminent danger, that's the only way that the city will get involved. And that process, we haven't dealt with that. Almost everybody comes into compliance within 45 days.
Got it. That was my understanding. Thank you. So Ms. Willis, is there already, is Title 15 already in a state of draft like what was given to us?
I don't know if it is or not.
Okay. Yeah, if you could find that out for us, and if it is available, then get that out to us so we can start looking at it.
I sure will.
Thank you. So we've covered everything on here, right? Member Bowden? This one. All right. So this one we've pretty much addressed as well. I noticed that the structure of the code was changed to be about purpose, and the purpose is stated now. Did anyone have anything else on goal or purpose that felt like it was missing? Go ahead, Member Dickerson.
Yeah, I thought that the purpose was too weak, and it doesn't say anything about protecting trees, diversity of planting, and protecting existing trees from damage of developers, or when I looked through, I saw all of the purposes in the 5 cities that I looked at, and Member Bowden was very careful to duplicate that for us, so it's all in one place. And it looked to me like Denver's purpose was the cleanest and the briefest, but the most encompassing. But I don't think that the purpose that they put in here is anywhere near good enough.
Okay. Do you want to write up a suggested new version to have for next time, and we can talk with the city attorney about?
Yes. And
Okay.
I'd also like to point out that they added a bunch of definitions that I think are not necessarily necessary or particularly good, like the definition of tree. It's kind of like what there's a lot of trees that don't reach a mature height of over 12 feet, like some of the red buds.
Okay.
And,
Well, that's an
and they
important
limit it to
recommendation.
16
Then.
feet, and like Siberian elms reach. Yeah, I think the definitions are unnecessary, but anyway, I think it just complicates things.
I don't see how we get around having definitions in code, like
Well, we didn't
keywords.
before.
And you mean, yeah, so we didn't have a definition of what a tree is. So that's something to consider and discuss then. So,
Yeah, I'll be happy to work up something, or, we could look at all, everybody should be looking at all of those purposes that the different cities have, and see how much of what they've got we want to include or exclude. But I think at the very minimum, we should say promote diversity of trees, a healthy diversity of trees and private property, protection of trees. And I think it should be built into the code too, that how to protect trees from development. And then that would guide the Unified Development Code. on trees, because right now it's pretty loosey-goosey. And it really doesn't protect trees at all, existing trees.
Ms. Willis?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So Member Dickerson, are you going to write up a sheet with all of these questions to give to the members of this board?
Yes, I will.
Would you please include me as well so that
I certainly
city-
will, but I think I should go to Carson, to our new chair,
Absolutely.
and then he can forward it to you and to
Right,
the rest of the committee.
because the city attorney, I'm sure, would like to know what the concerns are before she comes to this meeting, so she can have that ready to be addressed.
Yes, I
Yeah,
would.
so that makes perfect sense. So I'd like to see anyone who has thoughts on this that haven't, already just been spoken, or that you just want to, speak in discussion. But if it's, structural changes or feeling like things are missing, or thoughts on how to include things, like obviously Member Dickerson has a lot of those. Let's get those to me by a week before our next meeting.
Well, I hope to get it to you long before that.
Okay, good. But at least by then, so then, I can look at it and have time to get it to Ms. Willis, to get it to the city attorney, so they have time to review it too, before our meeting. And then, so on the authority code changes, the definition of authority, that seems pretty good, what's in there to me. Did anyone else have anything on that? Member Bowden? Or did you have your hand raised for something else?
I had my hand raised for something else. Sorry
Go
about
ahead.
that. There was one other thing I noticed, and if the other members have a better sense for this, let me know. I couldn't find the statement where you're supposed to use an arborist. Maureen, do you know if that was removed?
I do not.
Carson, I know what that is.
Go ahead.
Using an arborist is in the licensing code. It always has been. I don't think it was ever in this. I don't think it was ever in the tree and shrub code. It was in the licensing. But you may be right. I'll double check and look it up, but I'm pretty certain that it was in the licensing code. Or it may have been a suggestion of the previous city attorney. But I'll look it up and let you know.
I mean, in the code that's in the agenda, the word arborist doesn't even come up. The stricken part or the new part.
And I'm pretty certain that it was never in anything but the licensing.
And I think that would only apply to commercial. I don't think in the old, at least my memory of the old version of the code was a homeowner doesn't have to use an arborist for anything if they do it themselves, but if they hire someone, they have to use someone licensed, and someone licensed is based on whether they're licensed in, I think, like Denver or Lakewood, and that requires that they're an arborist. Isn't that accurate, Member Bowden?
That was I thought it was for private homeowners too. And if it is only in the licensing section, maybe we can recommend that it get moved to where homeowners could see it. Because if you're getting ready to, do something to your tree and you find out that there's standards, it'd be helpful to just go to one place that says, if you're going to have any work done on your tree, they must be a licensed arborist within the city of Inglewood. And if not, if we don't require arborists, I just want to make sure we point out to the city attorney that that used to be required. And I don't have an opinion on whether or not we have to require that moving forward.
Okay. Now, are you talking about if it's someone you hire? You're not saying that you think that homeowners shouldn't be able to do stuff themselves, right?
Right. Right.
Okay. That was the way I thought it was before. Okay, Member Dickerson?
Yeah, when I went through this, in the tree matrix that we did, there was not one place where they required you to use an arborist or any particular tree service. I think there was one city that required anybody you use be licensed by the city, but never a requirement for arborist. And basically, there isn't any definition in our licensing that requires an arborist. What they call an arborist is somebody that's licensed by the state to apply pesticides. And it has nothing to do with whether somebody is a member of the independent organization of arborists that set their own standards for calling somebody an arborist.
Okay,
But
yeah,
there-
that makes sense. I think we all agree it's about license. If you're gonna hire someone, they have to be licensed, and that we want to make sure that that's clear, that used to be somewhat clear. I thought it was.
It's in the licensing.
Code Manager Lewis?
You just touched on the point. I just wanted to reemphasize that if someone was to use an arborist, that it's licensed through the city of Inglewood. Referenced in this ordinance, not just in the licensing component, because those are two separate things. And also, I just wanted to make sure that we capture that homeowners, so that we're not putting an undue burden on homeowners, they still have the ability to remove on their own. And that's what I'm hearing. So thank you.
I'm one of those homeowners who likes to do it on his own. All right. Yeah, we're all on the same page on that. Let's make sure we have that language ready to share with city attorney. All right, so encourage desirable. All right, so now what about this part? Encourage property owners to plant, maintain diverse and desirable trees through programs, assistance in purchasing, selecting, planting, maintaining trees in order to expand the tree canopy. So this is more about kind of the programs we were hoping that we would find information about. And we did find information about what is out there. Denver has the most by far. And that's all in that matrix of what we found. And then I'm still curious what was implied in the last city magazine about the programs in the works to help people with that, because I don't think we've really learned what exactly that is. Does anyone know?
I have a little bit of information.
Okay.
Because I went to the Parks and Rec meeting last week and they've set aside funds, I think $30,000 or something like that. I'd have to look back and see exactly what it is, but they've hired the position of the forester, and that person is going to advise and help residents decide whether they have a tree that it's worth maintaining, or a tree that should be removed because we're not in that stage of the emerald ash borer epidemic. And I believe they gave a ballpark figure of $500 per tree as the cost that it would as the cost of mitigating emerald ash borer. So they would be offering that amount of funding towards that. I'll have to look back at what Parks and Rec said last week. But they have some like parameters set, and they've got a person in place to assist residents. So that is happening.
So that's specifically money that will be available to help with replacing ash trees.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
neat.
they're taking steps and putting things in place. And that's one of the things that I want to talk to Vanessa about, and why I asked for that to be mentioned in our next article, because people need to know about that, you know. In addition, the city tree sale is happening right now. So it just started on Monday and it's going on for a couple weeks. They're already sold out of a few varieties. So that is also part of this process. And I can see that expanding since they've gone to the online forum with a Arbor Day sale. They're selling out. So and Dave Lee is aware of that and hopefully plans to expand the number of trees that they offer in the future.
Thank you. Member Bowden.
Yeah, I was referring to the last bullet point there. So what we were trying to do was to encourage them to add a component in our purpose that applied to tree owners. It wasn't just establishing the importance of a tree canopy, but also encouraging, putting a statement in there for property owners that applies to them, just to catch their eye and let them know we care that they do these things.
Okay, so do you have ideas for sorry. Did you have ideas for modifying the purpose to include something about that?
I'm pretty sure Colleen has that because I believe I took this statement from Colleen's documents.
Okay.
If Colleen, could you add that to your list?
Yes, well, that's what I was saying, that it didn't have diversity or encouragement or anything else. So we needed to have that.
Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. All right, so did we hit on everything in here then that you were thinking of? Okay, good. Are there anything else we haven't talked about yet on the recommended code changes or the draft that we received, or questions or other things we'd like to ask or prepare the city attorney for our next conversation? Go ahead, Member Dickerson.
I think we did, but a question occurred to me this morning, and I should have mentioned it earlier. One of my neighbors has what I think are 2 ash trees, and they're about 5 feet back of the curb. He wasn't aware that there's a 12-foot easement. What he was concerned about was, is that easement right of way?
Code Member Manager Lewis, can you help with that?
So am I understanding that there is an easement and these trees are on the easement part or on the border of the easement?
No, we don't have any right of way or very, very little of it where we have the easement, which is 12 feet, the sidewalk, and then another right of way between the sidewalk and he's actually in the easement.
Okay, so the trees are there. So the way the ordinance is written is to maintain the adjacent right of way is the responsibility of the homeowner, whether that is
I understand that, but is the easement actually a right of way?
Yes, he would be responsible for maintaining that area between the sidewalk, the strip.
Well, he thought it was his property, so he's going to do that anyway. And so
okay,
I told him he would have to be responsible for it, whether it was right of way or not.
And that's how we enforce these in the same capacity.
Yeah, but I don't have an easement on my property. So and there's quite a few different properties that are in my same boat. So there's just very few places where there's easements or right of way plantings in Inglewood. But that doesn't address, and we did discuss this, and I believe it's on my list of things to address. If a tree is fully on private property, but could impact the right of way. Falling branches, needing pruning, no clearance or whatever. That's left out of this ordinance, this draft ordinance.
And I think based on my experience, because we deal with this with branches of other trees or trees that are too close or rose bushes that might be too close to the sidewalk, we still have to maintain, and that would be considered, we already have an ordinance regarding the obstruction of public right of way. So that would just fall into that category, regardless of what kind of tree or bush or shrub or planting that would be.
So it doesn't matter, the clearances and everything don't need to be in the ordinance?
A normal sized vehicle, not an oversized vehicle, must be able to transverse the area without any problems, and that includes the alleyways for regular sized vehicles and pedestrians. So, you know, we usually take the usual standard of I don't want to say common sense, but you know, if someone who is 7 foot can't go by, then that might be a little different than somebody who is 6 foot and is hitting their head. So we want to make sure that we don't create those dangers. And we do get those complaints for a variety of reasons, and we do enforce them.
There's one other question I've got on the visibility triangle, since that has specifically called out in this ordinance.
Mhm.
There is there any grandfathering in that, in anywhere? Because there are several places I've noted where there are mature plantings that are within that visibility triangle. And it's very, very dangerous, particularly on Ogden and Yale on the west side of the street.
Those are good points, and that's not something that falls to the codes division. We do have a traffic engineer that is responsible for investigating those. And so that person would go out and conduct the site triangles and then direct code enforcement to do any kind of enforcement.
So, but the way it's written into this particular draft ordinance, the director of Parks and Recreation is responsible for everything in this ordinance.
Yeah, for that component, but as far as the right-of-way obstruction or the right-of-way view, that does not fall to the purview of a tree expert. It actually falls to the purview of a traffic engineer to evaluate that. And that would be for any type of obstruction, whether it's a fence or a sight line. And there is no grandfathering into that. It is a traffic safety hazard that has been adopted. So I don't see, we have very few things that spell out in code where it's grandfathered in, or when building codes were certain ways, but with code enforcement, I would say no. This really does still fall to the traffic, and that's who we use.
Who has the authority over that? Because right now the draft, I think, has a loophole because the director, Parks and Recs, doesn't deal with the visibility triangle. So I'm not sure if it belongs here in this code or not.
I think we addressed that specifically in another part of the code.
Okay. Well, that'll be a question mark then, whether that belongs there or not.
Okay. Any other thoughts or ideas that we should talk about now on these potential code changes? Anything that I've taken as good a notes as I can. Obviously, this is recorded and go back through it, but and I know, Member Dickerson, you're going to have a lot when you put it all together. Go ahead, Member Strom.
The only thing I was really thinking about when we were talking about having a list of nuisance trees, I know that so many people's trees in my neighborhood that are probably 100 years old are nuisance trees. And so that would probably be very hard on a lot of people because they like them. Even we should probably make sure that we grandfather them in and just say that we don't allow for any new box elder or any new tree of heaven or Russian olives or
Siberian elms.
Siberian elms. Exactly. Because I think it would be really hard on a lot of people, and they would feel like they were losing something of their neighborhood. Because some people do like them, even though
Absolutely.
they are a nuisance. But I thought that would be something we should add in.
And I think that's what's intended by the old language around definition of mature tree, but it just wasn't a very good definition because it said 1 inch, which is practically everything. But I think we're all on the same page that we're not expecting people who have mature trees that are on the not recommended list to have to pay potentially thousands of dollars to have them removed if they're healthy. The goal is, even if someone's got, mature, healthy ash trees that they want to keep, that they can treat them and keep them.
good.
But I think that's an important point, and we'll make sure to get that in there. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Anybody else have anything else? Okay, so we're at 7:51 and we have not addressed whatever our next consideration on the dangerous dogs is. Chair Bowden, can you make sure I'm clear on where that stands? Or I'm sorry, former Chair Bowden, whatever.
Right? I think we were going to finish going through all the materials that had been prepared for EAB. The next one was the matrix.
Okay, so we haven't done that yet either. And it is you know what, why don't I bring up, I've got the actual Excel file, which is exactly the same content as what's in the agenda. Just, it's going to be easier to look at. I can bring that up real quick. Now, Member Dickerson in sometime at the end of last week sent me an update for this, and I did not have time to incorporate it in time to get it into the agenda. So, but I will for the next one. So Ms. Willis, expect a new version of that matrix with some updates for some of these cities that Member Dickerson added. But the version that I'm going to bring up right now is the same as what's in the agenda. It's just in the Excel format because I think it's a little easier to look at. So I guess everyone should have had access at least to this content. It's kind of weird looking at it the way it's laid out in the agenda, but let me know if you have any thoughts or questions. There's a lot of links in here too that go to like actual lists from these cities, like their recommended tree lists, their arborist lists. There's a lot of info in here. Go ahead, Member Bowden.
Wow, you guys did a great job. I was fascinated by this. What I did do, however, is I added vertical lines in between the cities.
Okay.
Because it helped me read it a little bit better.
Sure.
I mean, just to have the lines visible, it's easier to read, because when I printed it out, it was kind of like words floating on a page. So
yeah,
that might help.
And that's what's in the agenda?
Yes. No,
Okay.
I did it on my own when I printed it out here.
Oh,
I
okay.
was having trouble reading it.
Okay.
And then I also printed it in a landscape format, like you have here versus a portrait. So that was helpful too.
Yeah, I think that's easier to look at. So I don't know if anyone's had time to go through this, but we kind of broke it into two main sections. The top part here was based on what's actually in the ordinances. So the code for purpose, authority, responsibility for right of way, responsibility for alley, because some had them different. Prohibited trees, arborist requirement, and approved trees, and then rules related to disease, dying trees on private property, and then development requirement of diversity. And not all of them had all of these things, but for the cities that, we had originally considered: Boulder, Arvada, Longmont, Lafayette, Broomfield, Denver, and Westminster. Member Dickerson and I went through and got the data for all of these. So I don't know if anyone wants to ask any specific questions, or, I don't think it makes sense for me to like read through it all. And then the second part of what we did was the EAB specific subsidy, support, incentive programs and recommendations. So we documented when EAB was first found for each of the cities. Some of them it hasn't yet, like Denver's still not as of December 2021, or Denver not yet confirmed, and Broomfield not as of December 2021. What EAB education information they had, they pretty much all have websites about it, and then what the subsidies grants they have, and most of them it was just Arbor Day sale, but then Denver had multiple programs. They do have a free ash tree replacement program similar to what Member Johnson was just telling us. It sounds like we have in the works, which is pretty cool. And then Westminster has a on top of, or it's kind of their Arbor Day thing. It's they have a discount tree program, and the other ones were all just basically the Arbor Day sales, right? Member Dickerson?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then the only subsidy for treatment and removal, I think, that we found was the Denver in their free ash tree replacement program that does include removal and stump grinding, which is pretty interesting since that can be very expensive. And then nobody had a coordinated deal for treatment. But the Forester of Westminster included in our agenda is the email that I sent them, and he responded, and he was really curious about that and asked us to keep him up to date if Inglewood ends up doing anything like that. He liked the idea. So then you can see like all the different things that we tried to find info on. And then like Westminster, they don't even have their own list of arborists. They just referred to treesaregood.org. But most of them do have their own licensing or list of approved. Any thoughts or questions or anything on this?
I think you've created a great resource. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And that makes sense. Member Bowden, to make these lines easier to see the separations on. And Ms. Willis, is it possible to include other documents besides just like the text dumped into the file for the agenda? Is there a way to include other types of documents in the record? So if someone wanted to access like this Excel file, they could?
They recommend only PDF files.
Okay. Well, a PDF would give, because this could be turned into a PDF that has some formatting to it. So if I gave you a PDF, then you could include that instead of just putting the contents of it into the vertical, sync main agenda one. Would it be
Whenever
possible?
you send me, I can totally convert to PDF. That's not a problem.
Okay. Yeah, just so we can have like some formatting to it. And then I don't know, we just went through what's in here. This is kind of what we boiled down the questions from City Council. Did anyone have any other thoughts or anything to include or questions about including this to City Council in our response to their questions? Member Bowden, what do you suggest? How do you suggest we do this to actually forward it to them?
Well, I would recommend that you package everything together, because we have Where'd my agenda go? So we have this matrix. We also have
All the
examples.
purposes.
Yeah, the purpose. And then we also have proposals for programs or resolutions that we still need to refine.
Okay,
But I recommend that we package it together. That way we address all their questions and maybe remind them what their questions were.
that's a good point. Okay. So we still need to refine, which part did you just say?
The proposals for EAB programs or subsidies or resolutions. We put that together and finalized it in November of 21, but since then, a couple of things have come up, such, for example, the program with Parks and Rec for removing or treating trees. That wasn't in place when we wrote that. So we just need to go back through our proposal and see if there's anything we want to change or kick out.
Okay, so what would you think that the way I'm getting a lot of echo. Would you think that the way we would do this then would be just someone update that and then include it in our agenda next time, and then we just look at it all and agree that we package it and send it through City Council Member Russell?
I'm happy to go through that because I included a section of things that have already been enacted. So I can just move those things that have been done since then into that area, and I'll be happy to forward that to you and Maureen to include for next month.
Awesome. Okay. So is there anything else we need to decide on and discuss for this? Or do you feel like we have everything to send our response once we've organized it together, and then we can just do a final review in our next meeting?
The only other one is the tree authority samples. I added Arvada, and if anyone has any changes to that, I just basically cut and paste. So I think, I don't know if we have to approve that, but maybe when we put the package together and approve it all at once together.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Okay, then we are past 8 o'clock. We have not touched on dangerous dogs, so we'll move that forward for next time. Let's schedule our next meeting. Gonna stop sharing my screen. So our normal next meeting would be the 20th, right?
Your meetings are held on the third Wednesday of every month.
Yeah, so we've been adjusting them because of that Elevate Inglewood program, so that I've been able to attend that, and I appreciate everyone being flexible on that. I believe my last scheduled Elevate Inglewood meeting is on the 13th, so the 20th should be fine. So is anyone opposed to going back to our regular schedule and having our meeting on the 20th? Okay, then we'll.
I have to say it is 420. If you know what that means.
Uh-oh, Carson, you're frozen.
Oh, wow.
We may have lost him. I don't know.
Can we just assume that are we all in agreement that the 20th is a good time? So we'll just assume that, and we don't have to vote on it. He's made the decision, so no objection. So since we don't have a vice chair, in order, can Maureen adjourn the meeting?
Well, I don't know that I'm supposed to, however, since there's no one else to do it. Yes, and it is past 8 o'clock, so due to the fact that the chairman is, has been lost via
Maureen,
Zoom.
Maureen,
Yeah.
sorry, I called Carson.
Okay,
So,
My computer crashed. I apologize, everybody. I'm not sure what happened, if it was a power issue or what. It looks like power.
he had a
Anyway.
computer crash.
So I think did Member Russell, did you have anything to bring up?
Member Russell, do you have anything else?
I do not.
Okay. Are we all good with the date for the next meeting? Everybody, since we have Carson on the line, is everybody?
yes,
okay?
everyone has agreed with the meeting time of 4:20 at 6 PM.
Okay. Are we all good then?
Yeah, so let's go ahead and adjourn. Thank you, everyone. Sorry I got booted off.
It's okay. There's always a workaround. Good job, Chairman Carson.
Yes.
Talk to y'all
Thank
later.
you.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.